2, 3. So I'm here today with Michael Tubbs, City Council member who's now running for mayor of Stockton. I'm a Stockton resident along with my co-producer Nick McCollum, both Stockton boys here to try to tell Michael Tubbs' story. So Michael, again, I wanted to start out with just talking about your character. A lot of your friends talk about your character, and if you could provide our listening audience a little background. Again, sorry to do it for the second time, but you're very good at it.
My name is Michael Tubbs, born and raised in Stockton. In addition, I represent now a city council. It's the same area I grew up in and came of age in. So when we're talking about closing problem liquor stores, or we're talking about areas where drug trafficking, it's not just stuff that I read in the newspaper. It's things I've lived and experienced, which I think gives me a great perspective and a little bit of nuance in terms of the solutions we produce. So growing up in Stockton, my mom, she had me when she was a teenager, and my father has been incarcerated my entire life. So I grew up in poverty, grew up in quote-unquote tough neighborhoods, but there were a lot of different community supports and inputs that helped me get to where I am today. So my mom and my grandmother, they made sure that I had structured activities in play. There was a lot of recreation opportunities available in the city. I remember playing recreation basketball literally year-round, and then AAU. We had a strong support system in our church that provides some spiritual underpinning and structure and leadership opportunities. And I was able to go to high-quality magnet public school. So I was in the IB program from the time I was in 7th grade to 12th grade. And then because of a lot of those experiences, there's a lot of youth leadership opportunities as well. So I remember being chair of the Youth Advisory Commission for 2 years on the Youth Education Action Team. So by the time I was 14, 15, 16, I was used to being in meetings with city officials and bureaucrats and sometimes even running the meetings. I remember one time I called a meeting with the mayor and a council member and made the agenda and then facilitated the meeting with the mayor and council member there. And everyone was like, who was this 15-year-old kid? And because of a lot of those experiences, I was able to get a full ride to go to Stanford for 4 years. And at Stanford, through my 4 years, I thought that was my chance to make a lot of money and leave Stockton behind. But throughout my time there, I did a lot of work with in East Palo Alto, tutoring and running after-school programs. I started a nonprofit that did college admissions consulting for free for first-generation low-income students. That's still going, called the Phoenix Scholars. But then about 2010, I was interning in the White House for intergovernmental affairs, and my job was to work with mayors and councils nationwide. And while doing that, it was interesting to see what things were happening at a local level, how people were really making things happen for their cities. And I thought, well, hey, I need to go and find good people in Stockton to donate to so that the people who live in Stockton enjoy good governance. And then around that time, one of my cousins was murdered in the spike of homicide Stockton saw in 2010, 2011. And going back home, dealing with the pain and the funeral, it caused me to question kind of the path I was on, because the summer before I had interned at Google, I thought I was going to be a management consultant. But then going home and really dealing with the pain, I realized that a lot of the opportunities I had been given had to be more just for me to be comfortable and materially rich. So that's when I decided I would one day move back to Stockton. And then 2011 came, and we had another year of record homicides, another spike. It was my senior year in college, and I was just torn as to what I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be a Rhodes Scholar in England for 3 years, and that didn't work out. So then I thought I'd just get a job and figure things out as I went on. And then coming home that Christmas break, there was talk about this thing called a Marshall Plan to deal with crime that hadn't yet materialized. And I took it really personal. So to make a long story short, that's when I decided to run for office. So I guess in summation, I'm just a born and raised Stocktonian who was really blessed to have been exposed to a lot and got a lot of opportunities and came back to kind of make that a reality for more people.
And so how would you say, so back to the whole idea we were talking before about it takes a village, right? You had, your father was incarcerated, but you had people in your life. Your grandmother, who I know is very important to you, your aunt and your mom. What are the things that they could have instilled in you that you feel like really helped you, build that sense of character, that sense that you could be a leader?
Yeah, I would say they were incredibly wise, and that despite the very real challenges and the very real resource scarcity, if you will, they always spoke in terms of assets versus deficit. And I'm not even sure if they even know that frame, but it was always my whole upbringing was assets based. It was, you're smart, you're just as smart as everyone else, you can do it. Do you need help? What help can we give you? Or nothing, a B is not acceptable if you can get an A, so get A's. It was always like that. Or it was almost as if to inoculate around all the real challenges in the neighborhood. It was just it was instilled just this belief in yourself, but also in a higher power that no, you're like, no, this may be difficult, but it's not insurmountable, it's not impossible. And then also just a very strong cultural upbringing. So by the time I was in sixth grade, I think I read every one of Frederick Douglass's autobiographies and all of Booker T. Washington's and all of MLK. So stuff, and read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was in fifth grade. Things like that. So it really instilled in me a kind of a not just a sense of pride, but a sense of possibility that despite challenges and structural obstacles, that there are paths to be successful.
And so you had mentors in your life. You also, her higher power, and I know that you're very engaged in your church and faith. How have those two things you think help build your character?
Yeah, I would not be doing the work I do in politics if it wasn't for faith. I think oftentimes people of faith get a bad rap because the Bible is really abused and used as a tool of oppression when it's actually a liberatory book if you actually read it. So I remember in college discovering scriptures like the righteous care about justice for the poor, or whatever I required of you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God, or plead the cause of the fatherless and the widow and the orphan. Like in all the prophets, that's what they spoke about. And that just really motivates the work I do now. In Stockton, in many places, a city that's forgotten, a city that's full of orphans and fatherless children and widows and oppressed folks that need people to kind of not cry out for them, but with them, but also think through how do you make sure that all the institutions are working for their benefit and not for their detriment. So I think faith really informs a lot of my political work, because if it wasn't for that, I would definitely be doing something else.
Understandable. So is there a mentor that you could point to, or I know that your pastor is very important to you, someone who's, acted as a mentor and provided a hand up in that direction?
Yeah, I would say a lot of my mentors I have, it's more observational. I watch people and see how they walk and see how they talk and see how they treat people, and I learn from that. So I think the variety of pastors, the pastor of my childhood, Alfred Smith, the pastor of my teenager, early adulthood, Dumasani, Washington, and then the pastor of the biggest church in my district, Pastor Shields. They've all been mentors in a myriad of ways, just in terms of reaching out to me, talking to me, but also just modeling a life of principle and excellence.
And I know from watching some of your past speeches and seeing you at Mills College, for example, one of the things you've talked about is the importance of being rejected and how you see that as an opportunity for recalibration or reinvention. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think oftentimes, especially in high-achieving places, rejection is seen as such a bad thing, like losing, failure, you lost. But I know for me personally, it's been every time I've been rejected, and that sense of rejection and sense of failure, it's also been a time of clarity to really think through and recalibrate, like what is the goal I'm trying to reach. So I think the biggest example is when my senior year, I just knew I was going to be a Rhodes Scholar. It was written, that's what I was going to be. I was a finalist. I was like, oh, this is definitely in the bag, but there's no reason why I'll be a finalist if I'm not going to get this. And then when it didn't, and I put all my eggs in that basket, I didn't have any applications, had nothing planned. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. I have 3 years to read books in England and figure things out. And then when the rejection happened, I remember at first feeling really like upset and sad, almost like a sense of entitlement, like because at 21 years old, I had surmised for myself my path, that everything would align perfectly the way I wanted it. But it was actually after getting over myself and my sense of entitlement, it was actually in that moment that it really forced me to think through kind of why was this important to you? Like, was this the ends or was this a means to an end? It was in that examination I was like, oh, I thought I needed to be a Rhodes Scholar to run for city council in Stockton. And then more reflections, like, no, well, how about you just run now? If you don't get it, then you can do something else. But you don't need this degree to necessarily do what you wanted to do. And I think if you look through history, a lot of people will say the same things. Like, everyone knows the story about Michael Jordan being cut from his basketball team, or Thomas Edison failing thousands of times, or Oprah Winfrey being told she didn't have the voice or face for TV when she was a young anchor. And I think those rejection experiences that we all go through are really almost refining fires, and really times to kind of get character out of you, kind of humble you, but also to make sure you have some clarity as to what it is that you want to do. Because if it's something that you really want to do, rejection would just be a temporary setback. But if it's not something you really want to do, that rejection will be used as a way for you to just quit and do something else. And
Right.
I think both those things are fine.
Well, and what comes to mind is your kind of, to use a faith term, right? Your kind of resurrection from the DUI, right? You mean you got the DUI. It was a great opportunity for everyone to take, proverbial pot shots at you, etc. Can you, kind of walk the audience through a little bit, like, what that? Because to me, it seems like an opportunity for recalibration.
Yeah. So
how did you use that experience?
Yeah. So in 2014, I made a horrible decision to drive when I was over the limit. A decision I'm still paying for, a horrible mistake. But I think the lesson in that was this idea that I think being so young, I had prided myself on always doing the right thing. And I think part of that got to my head in a sense that I'm always going to, so I could identify and I could help these folks who need help, but it's not me because I always do the right thing, right? So that was part of it. But I think the most important part was that I didn't realize how, at the time, I was like 23, 24, how precious public trust or people believing in you and looking up to you was. And how people were really personally hurt by a decision I made that I had no idea just how deeply it would be felt within the community and how much faith that people have put in me. So I think that was a good opportunity to learn young. Number one, the importance of doing the right thing all the time. But number two, understanding that having a platform, having a voice, having a position that people look up to and people value and want to see what you're doing and care about what you think, that's priceless. There's no price you can put on that, and you can work your whole life for something, and one stupid mistake can mess it all up. So it's a decision I'm still paying for, but I think it's really helped me be more empathetic in the work I do, especially with ex-offenders and those coming out the system and helping them transition to jobs. But it's also taught me the capacity of folks to forgive, and that despite those who may be rooting for you to fail, may want you to do bad, there's a whole lot of other people who want to make sure you succeed and will offer themselves up as help and shoulders to cry on and people to think through. So it shouldn't have happened, but I think the lessons from it were valuable.
And do you feel like it's made you a better community leader?
Yeah, I think it's made me a better community leader in that it's thickened my skin and forced me to really step up. I mean, it's easy to lead, or it's easy to speak to kids, for example, when everything's right. Like, you went to Stanford, you never got in trouble before, you're on city council, you have a movie about you. That's an easy story to tell. It's much more difficult to tell a story when folks know your highs and your lows. But I think it's in that vulnerability and the authenticity that people are more able to see themselves and realize that making good decisions isn't good, but that if you are human, you make a bad decision, that's not the end of the story either. So I think it's really helped me mature. It's helped me be more empathetic, and it's helped me to be comfortable being vulnerable and allowing people to see that you're not perfect and that you're just as flawed as them. But we have this huge task of making the city better that I'm volunteering myself to help lead.
And so that leads me to talk a little bit about, since we're in Reinvention, right? One of the organizations, and just turn to your community development work, which is impressive, but also have you try to explain to people who are listening into the show and perhaps have never really heard of Michael Tubbs. You started Reinvent Stockton. You've had a hand in a bunch of different nonprofits that Nick and I will talk to as part of our 4-part story. But it was, I'd like to turn to just like why Reinvent. What was the kind of germ behind that? That because I think it's an interesting idea. And both being Stockton residents, we've thought, wow, Stockton needs a reinvention. Multiple decades ago, right? And it continues. But why Reinvention? Why reinvent Stockton? How did you get the idea? And then more importantly, how did you put the team of people together?
So one of my best friends in life is Cameron Henry. Met him in college. He's not a Stockton guy, but he just knew my passion for Stockton because every paper I wrote at Stanford was about Stockton or an issue facing Stockton. So after the city council race, he was like my manager for the first month while we found somebody while studying for the MCAT and doing other crazy things. He came down and we were just listening to folks. We were talking about the campaign and what I wanted to do, and we were thinking about a theme. And he said, I'm not from here, but it sounds like that what we're really talking about is reinvention. And we're like, that's brilliant. And he's like, well, reinvent Stockton. And we put a hashtag on it, and that became kind of the rallying cry for the campaign 2012, because given the backdrop of 2012, that's the year we declared bankruptcy. That's the year we had a record number of homicides. There's a lot of the mood in the community was really different than the mood you feel now. It was very like melancholy and downtrodden, and it just needed a boost of energy in a reinvention, if you will. And then it really caught on. Like people were, even if you go on Twitter now, you put in Reinvent Stockton, you have people who are affiliated and aren't affiliated talking about things they are doing to make the community better. So you say, oh wow, we've created something that people are really attached to. And then when I was elected, we had all these people rallied around and excited about this idea of Reinvent Stockton. So it took a year to really think through how do I channel that energy into something that will make the city better. So then my district, South Stockton, had a lot of issues, and there were a lot of organizations who were excited about the idea of Reinvent Stockton. So I kind of brought them together, and we started the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition, which is really a three-part thing. The first thing, it's a collective impact strategy to boost outcomes in South Stockton around five key areas using a very rigorous evidence-based indicator result framework that we learned from PolicyLink. The second thing is creating a civic engagement structure so that folks can be involved and be a part in reinventing their community. So that looks like our park cleanups we do every month with over 100 people for the past year. Each time, we just built a park at Liberty Park on East Jefferson Street and things like that. And the third thing was to create a voice for South Stockton, because I realized in my first 2 years on council that a lot of the stuff we were able to get done, whether it was city funding for the gym or whether it was the grand jury issuing a report, was just because I was at the table talking about it and making it an issue. And it's like, well, the needs of South Stockton we can't risk the needs of South Stockton being met based on who the political leaders are, because you may not always have good political leaders, but the work has to continue. So how do we create a community voice that will always be at the table, so that they know so that institutions know when it's time to do work in South Stockton, meet with this coalition of folks and organizations first. So that's kind of where the impetus for the work come from. And last year we had our first Reinvent South Stockton Summit. We had over 300 people attend, across institutions, across race, from throughout the city, to think through how do we make South Stockton better. And this year it's been incredible. We just opened a health clinic at the Dorothy Jones Center. We shut down New Grand Safe Liquor Market. We just won a $500,000 trauma recovery grant from California Endowment to do trauma-informed care for the residents of South Stockton. We built a park with Liberty Park. We've just done incredible work, and a lot of it comes from sort of leadership and bringing the people together who have the solutions, and then forcing us to do the hard work of working together and acquiescing our individual wills and agenda for the collective one. But now people are seeing that, wow, this actually works, and we've been able to accelerate things that people said would never happen in the past 3 years.
Right. So we're going to go back, because I'm going to come back on the 24th for the ribbon cutting, because that's the only moment I'm going to get a chance to, get to Hector and Jasmine to talk about, their perspective on Reinvent. But I know Health Center was an important piece, and then the other piece I'd like to turn to is also, the whole idea of some kind of a bank. Because, as we know, if you look across the United States, there's about 10 million people that have no banking relationship. And we'll get into that in just a second. But talk a little bit about the health center. Why was it important? It was there before, as I recall, and then was that part of the closure with the whole bankruptcy?
No, so the health clinic was part of I think in the early 2000s or mid-2000s, there was a Blue Ribbon Crime Prevention Committee. Congressman Cardozo got a grant for $1 million multi-use community center in South Stockton, the Dorothy Jones Center. And the Community Partnership for Families ran the center, and part of the center was a health clinic. But the Community Partnership for Family, there aren't doctors. They're not a medical institution, so they didn't have the staff necessarily to staff that part, and the partnerships weren't formed to operate that. So the center had been doing great work for many years, but that health clinic has sat dormant. So in 2013, I took a tour, and they showed me, and I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know this was here. It was fully stocked and nice rooms. I was like, we can really do something here. But the issue was finding a provider to run care out of there. And then the same year we did a community assessment, and the top thing on everyone's list was health. And I thought it would be safety or education, but the top thing was lack of access to health care. This is also up to the Affordable Care Act, so all these folks now qualify for health care and need a health home. And luckily for us, community medical clinics, Hector, who's the coordinator for Reinvention South Stockton, he had worked part-time, half-time for them. And his director had been looking for open up shop in South Stockton. So we just connected the dots and said, well, why don't you operate here? And now the health clinic is operating at 20 hours a week. I think it's going to get to 32 in the near future. And just the demand has been huge because folks needed somewhere to go to care. And I think for me, it's important because oftentimes if you're from, maybe if your family's been here in America for a long time or you're from a less impoverished community, things like health clinics or banks are things you take for granted. But in a lot of places throughout this country, including South Stockton, for some people, that's not something they have access to. So doing something as simple as opening a health clinic is such a huge deal because now people have access to care and preventative care so that a lot of the illnesses don't become chronic and we all have to pay more for them later.
Right. And I know poverty, obviously, that's where you came from, right? And, it's a very large, issue. And, you've shared that, being a resident in a low-income, poverty-based neighborhood takes about 15 years of your life away, right? So with things like the, the community medical center, how do you envision that helping?
Yeah, I think it's a continuum of care, right? As they say in the healthcare world. So it's having access to healthcare and preventative care. Then it's also having access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And then it's also making sure, and which is why the trauma grant is so huge, it's also access to like care when you're experiencing trauma from poverty, trauma from neighborhood violence, trauma because your mom may have been stressed while she was pregnant with you, which spiked the cortisol levels in your brain. So to really counteract the effects of poverty, it's really bringing all those things that in other communities take for granted. Like I just call them the necessities, like a safe space to play. So you're not inside all day eating hot Cheetos, but you're outside at the parks, and that's why the park cleanup work we do is so important. It's having access to fresh fruits and vegetables, which is why closing the liquor store was so important because they were selling rotten meat and rotten fruits and vegetables, and folks had nowhere to go to get an apple.
Is there a plan? I'm sure you're thinking about how do you get either food carts in or some kind of a small micro enterprise that's providing fresh fruits and vegetables and higher quality meats, for example?
Yeah, we have. So there's a Rancho San Miguel that's about a mile away, but 50% of people don't have cars. So no one wants to walk 3 miles with, especially unless you take the baskets. So you want to walk 3 miles with all your bags and stuff. So right now, in terms of the new Grand Save lot, which is a liquor store we closed down, we're working with a receiver to figure out what's going to go there. So we don't have any control over that process, sadly. It's going to be profit driven, I'm sure. But the receiver has been amenable to listening to community input and ideas. So we have a meeting actually on the 18th at 6 o'clock with him to talk about that. And then STAN, an organization I work closely with, they were just awarded the exclusive negotiating rights from the city about a lot near there. And I know one of the things they want to do is fresh fruits, vegetables, co-ops, things of that sort. So I actually connected them 2 weeks ago with Mandela Markets, who have been doing that work in Oakland and other communities. So hopefully there's something fruitful that comes from that.
Or even maybe the People's Market as well, because they did a nice, successful, basically a public fundraise.
Really?
Yeah. So they did a Kickstarter campaign, essentially, crowdfunding. But then they did work on what's called a public offering. So in the state of California, you can actually go out and have a public offering in your community, so people who are members of a community can actually purchase stock in an organization.
Oh, wow.
So I think I have the contact information of
Please
the
do.
founder of People's Market. But you should reach out. It's a really interesting.
I would love to.
Yeah, that's an interesting model. In of course West/East Oakland, similar situation.
That's good. People's Market. Okay.
Yep. Food deserts, big issue.
Huge issue.
So that also leads me to Kaboom, right, which is a project on parks. Since we're on the health, bench, talk a little bit about Kaboom and the idea of why it was created and how it's being executed with the redevelopment of parks.
Yeah. So Kaboom came out of nowhere.
That's the best.
It came out of nowhere. We had been doing a lot of great work cleaning up parks, really led by two of our Reinvent folks, Jasmine Delafosse and Sarah Neely. And Kaboom had reached out. No, Little Manila Foundation emailed me and said, hey, Kaboom wants to do something in Stockton. Can you make it happen? And typical for me, I read it. I said, we might be able to do something with this. Jasmine, Sarah, what do you think? And then the next thing I know, I'm in a meeting and we have to raise $18,000 in 3 weeks, but we have all these other competing priorities going on. So at first I was a little bit apprehensive, honestly. I said, well, you guys, this is the best use of our time. We're going to raise $18,000. We can raise $18,000 for a lot of things. But the team was like, no, Michael, let's do it. So they planned a little bit of fundraisers, and I raised some money on my end, and next thing I know, we're building this park. And what's interesting, because the park's not necessarily in my council district, but it's part of Reinvention South Stockton umbrella. It was just beautiful. Like, we were building, and families would come and play, and kids were waiting so the day they could get on the monkey bars and on the jungle gym and things of that sort. And I remember talking to families there, and they were telling me how they never come to the park because it was never safe, or because they thought that it was dirty and ugly. And now the park has become like a community gathering place. So we are starting neighborhood watches in that community based off the work of that park, looking at how do we help with the homeless situation in that park. And we have a whole bunch of people who have real ownership over this park because we spent so many hours and so much time fundraising and building the park that people really have a sense of ownership in keeping it safe. So all in all, it was a brilliant move and a win for the community. Although at first it looked like a whole bunch of work.
So let's turn to banking for a moment. So there was obviously the usual, harvesting of usury fees in the neighborhood, right, through the form of check cashing. So what was the problem and the issue, and how did you work together with the community, and who did you work with to turn that around?
Yeah, so in most communities, there's a bunch of predatory lending places, check cashing places, or liquor stores that charge you a lot of money to cash your checks. And in South Stockton, there's a bank on Charterway, but again, if 50% of people don't have access to vehicles or a car, and there's no bus route necessarily that goes there regularly, a lot of people are just underbanked and not banked. And Financial Center Credit Union, their president of their board, Miss Brenda Jones, she's from South Stockton. Miss Dorothy Jones, Brenda's her daughter. But the Dorothy Jones Center, where the health clinic is, named after her. And she had been on him for years about, when you gonna open a bank in South Stockton? So one day I was just in the meeting with the bank president, and I was just trying to understand from a business perspective what makes people invest in communities, not others. So I just asked him, so what would it take to open up a bank, for example, or a credit union in South Stockton? He said, you know what? I've been thinking about it for a while. I'm gonna get serious and do it. And then over the next year, working with him and kind of our city departments to make sure that we were good on our end to help kind of accelerate the process, so it's not cumbersome trying to do something good for the community. And the financial credit union was opened on the Airport Way, and that was such a huge deal because a lot of people are scared to invest in South Stockton. Sometimes they think it's going to be crime or vandalized or not taken care of. But again, the community has shown that they deserve nice things too, or we deserve nice things too. And there's no vandalism. It's probably one of the most successful branches. It's super safe. It's super clean. And the liquor store that we closed down was right across the street from that, which has made the workers and folks happy because now so we're slowly cleaning up that whole Airport Way area, and it's exciting to be a catalyst for a lot of that work.
And so can you talk a little bit about Phoenix Scholars, which, as I recall from my conversation with Nicholas, it started out as Summer Success and Leadership Academy.
No, I think sometimes Nick gets confused because there's so much going on.
There's so much to the Michael Tubbs story. It's very difficult to keep the ecosystem, aligned. So
the Phoenix Scholars, I started in 2009, and basically is because I realized that I was able to get a lot of success through college admissions because I had someone who had been paid $30,000 by wealthy people who worked for me for free, and all she did was simple things like proofread my application. She made sure my email address wasn't lovetobeball247, which it was at that time. and things like that. It was just the polish on it, and it paid huge dividends. She was someone who was knowledgeable about deadlines and just helped me be organized because as a first generation student, your parents are working 14-hour days. You may not back then internet wasn't as accessible, so I had slow dial-up AOL internet. And the process was a little bit overwhelming because I was still in IB. I was still working 5 to 8 hours a day at Barnes & Noble, still trying to be a senior, and on top of that, I have to fill out these applications. So then when I got to college, I said, well, wow, this is such fertile ground. Like, all of us have been through the college admissions process. We have Skype, we have text messaging, we have email. I've never met the woman in person who helped me, Carolyn Lawrence, who's a good friend. So I said, why can't we just do that? So I worked with the Stanford Admissions Office to provide training to a bunch of students, and the first year I got 45 of my friends to agree to work with one or two students who would be first generation, college going, and or low income, parents making less than $60,000 a year. And that was year one. In year two, we went from 95 kids to 230 kids and 110 mentors, and now we've been doing that number for the past 4 years, and it's been wonderful because now our first class graduated from college like 2 years ago, so now they're adults, and some other students founded chapters on their own campuses. And so then the next year, myself and a friend, we started this Summer Success and Leadership Academy, which is a program we run at UOP. We run at UOP every summer that brings 40 to 50 students from Stockton Unified Schools to UOP for a week, where they learn about community organizing, take a couple college classes, and they have to come up with a community action plan that they then execute over the next year. So they live on campus for a week. They're college students. All their mentors are Stockton natives who are either low income or first in their families to go to college, who are now in college, who are mentoring them. And that's been going for 6 or 7 summers now. And the students from that first class have now graduated from college. And a lot of our staff are students who were once students in the program. So it's been great, in addition to council, to have been started even before then, creating these ecosystems of opportunities for folks and pipelines for people to kind of access higher education if that's something they want to do.
So 2 more community things, and then we'll turn to the mayor race for a second. So one of the ones that was fascinating to me is fathers and families. Obviously, coming from your own place, can you share a little bit about fathers and families, why it's important to your district and the community? What was the germination of it?
Yeah, Fathers and Families of San Joaquin is an organization started by Sammy Nunez. And they've been lauded statewide and nationwide for their work. And with them, I do a lot of My Brother's Keepers work, and our Boys and Men of Color Alliance countywide. And the work they do so much, so it's hard to describe. But a lot of it's around kind of reintegrating ex-offenders back into the community with kind of jobs and training. But they also now operate a trauma center, one of 6 in the state, where folks throughout the city can access care when a traumatic event happens, usually a violent traumatic event. They do a lot of advocacy and community organizing focused around issues of juvenile justice, mass incarceration, things of that sort. So they're like a one-stop shop for anything social justice oriented in the city. So one of the things I'm proudest of working with them on is that I was able to work with them, the Michael G. Santos Foundation, California Wellness, and Sierra Health to pilot a back-to-work program for ex-offenders. Because oftentimes these guys go through these job training programs, but there's no job at the end, which is frustrating. So once I found out about that, I said, well, how do we get them jobs? So we were able to work with Golden State Lumber to guarantee if guys went through this straight A guide program developed by Michael G. Santos, that upon completion, they would at least get a 3-month job opportunity at Golden State Lumber. And a lot of them have converted to full-time. Not 100% as I would like, but a significant amount. So it's great to have, and I think that's important to underscore in Stockton, that we may have a lot of issues and opportunities, but it's not because a lot of people aren't doing the work. We have a lot of people, especially in the social service sector, that are doing the work. They just need partners in the institutions like government to partner with them to kind of accelerate and scale what they're doing.
And so now turning to the LGBTQ community, right? I mean, a sad statistic is there was the woman that was the guy that was just convicted. So 17 trans people have been murdered in the United States this year, for example. The San Joaquin Pride Center. Tell us a little bit about kind of the your relationship with the Pride Center. Why is the Pride Center an important component in Stockton's community?
I love the Pride Center, partly because Nicholas Haddon, a dear friend of mine, is the executive director, but more importantly, they do an important work of educating the community. It's through the Pride Center and Nick Haddon that I learned about the fact that half of our homeless youth are actually LGBT youth who have been kicked out their homes, or the fact that a lot of the youth in juvenile justice facilities are LGBT youth who also they've been really kind of educating me on the issues peculiar to LGBT youth in a way I would not have known without kind of their expertise and guidance. And I think they've also been a really good training ground because in Stockton, a lot of our best leaders also happen to be LGBT. And a lot of that's because the Pride Center provides a network of support and, I guess, leadership development for folks to understand that they may be marginalized in one aspect of their identity, but they still have a voice and they still matter for the wider political conversation and how we make the community better. So the Pride Center has always been a valued resource, and has really opened my eyes to issues in the LGBT community, but especially those affecting LGBT youth.
And so now turning to the mayoral, right? You just won the primary. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And, you're, basically marching towards a potential win. If you were to become the mayor, the next mayor of Stockton, what would you do in your first 100 days?
Man,
everybody's favorite question.
Yeah, first 100 days, there's so much I want to do. But I think the most important thing I want to do in the first 100 days is that we have a model in Reinvention South Stockton that, in terms of collective impact, that needs to be scaled to the other 4 hot zones throughout the city. So a lot of my time in the first 100 days will be spent in Kelly Drive, in townhomes, in the Wagner Heights, Thornton Road area, where there's a lot of crime, but there's also just a lack of opportunity. There's high crime, but there's also high unemployment, low access to opportunity, things of that sort. So really spending the first 100 days in rallying community supports, nonprofit support, philanthropic support, to how do we help these neighborhoods improve? Because if these neighborhoods improve, the entire city of Stockton improves. So that's the first thing. The second thing in the first 100 days is really solidifying the relationship with the superintendents in the area. Because for Stockton to improve, our schools have to be world-class and top quality. So offering any support I can by way of mayor to ensure that school districts are raising standards and that kids have, again, my favorite word, access to opportunity. The third thing on the homelessness front is really moving us towards a housing first solution. All the research I've done has shown that it works. The issue is that it's expensive. So in Stockton, in partnership with the county, we'll have to do something at scale. So maybe it's not all 230 homeless people the first year. Maybe it's just 30. But at 30, that's still a huge dent in the homeless issue in Stockton. It's 30 people who now are in homes in which they can receive the services they may or may not need to really live productive lives. And then the fourth thing as mayor in the first 100 days is really sitting down with our police chief again and fine-tuning our ceasefire strategy. I think we've been doing a good job on the enforcement side with the U.S. Attorney, with DA's office, with the chief. We're not playing. Violence, that's our priority. If you are a viewer in a group that's participating in violence, you will be taken off the streets. But I do think we could do more on my favorite word, the opportunity side. And if these guys do want to put away their guns and do want to change their life, that there's real opportunity, whether it's tattoo removal or jobs or education for them. And we haven't yet solidified that part yet. So I'll spend a lot of my first 100 days on that, making sure we have all the support. So then if we're punishing folks, it's really because they literally made a choice. They had an opportunity, they rejected it.
And I think that's a key component, obviously, with, again, what's just happened in Milwaukee in the last 48 hours, right? I mean, literally almost every day there's a youth of color, or specifically lives that have been taken by police. Do you feel like the Stockton police, which hasn't had the world's best reputation in the past, do you feel like there's an opportunity to turn the corner there? Because a lot of it is resources. During the bankruptcy, the resources, were such that they couldn't do much for police, right? And there was a lack of police, and then it goes back the other way.
Well, the New York Times just ran a great article about the work our police department, and I've been blessed to be a partner with, on implicit bias training, procedural justice training, and I can't speak to the historic nature of the police department, but I know in the past 3.5 years, it's been a priority of our police chief and rank and file to really figure out how do we improve police-community relations. And also, I think because we're so understaffed, we've been forced to really rethink the paradigm of policing. And what I've been saying a lot this year is that the issue is that we expect officers to do everything that we as a society won't do. So we want them not only to enforce the law, but we want them to be teachers and mentors and racial theorists and social workers and jobs. And that's not what they're trained, mental health professionals. That's not what they're trained to do. They're trained to be police officers. And they should have all those other skills, but more importantly, let's make sure that communities have mental health professionals in them. Let's make sure they have high-quality schools. Let's make sure they have jobs, so then police can go and do what they're designed to do. It's going to be an issue if they have to do all these 7 things, right? That's impossible for one person to do. That's why there's different professions that specialize. So I think because Stockton's been so understaffed, it's forced us to really think through sort of what does safety look like. Is safety just an officer on every corner? Is that safety? Or a safety ecosystem of opportunity that have police officers as members of a community, not occupying force? So we've been doing a lot of work on that, and that work will continue.
So, last question. You've been interviewed by a lot of people, have a documentary film made about you, done TED Talks. Is there one thing that people don't know about you that you would like to share?
It's a great question. I feel like life is such open, but there's one thing people don't know about me. It's a good question. I've never been asked that. Let me think about it. I think if there's one thing people don't know, not necessarily about me, but just about the work. I think oftentimes because Facebook and Instagram and movies and interviews can make stuff seem so easy and so serendipitous and so inevitable, like it was going to happen. It's like, no, it takes a lot of work, and I don't think people understand just the amount of time, energy, wherewithal, resources, brain space is just taken in trying to do simple things like open a health clinic or open a bank. I think oftentimes people think that it's easy or it's just bam bam. It's like no. So if there's one thing I wish people knew, just the amount of work it takes, not just for me but for my entire team of folks to kind of make these things happen.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
With Michael Tubbs, mayoral candidate of Stockton, and
Start over. Okay,
sorry.
we're rolling now.
all right.
Sorry, here we go.
No worries. Here with Michael Tubbs. My name is Nick McClendon here on KCSF Radio, talking about the Reinvent Stockton movement as well as the mayoral race that you're in right now. A few questions for you that I have. Mainly, you have many affiliations with different art groups. One comes to mind is With Our Words. What is your affiliation with Our Words, and what does it mean to you?
So With Our Words, I've been working with them since I was in high school. I used to help plan spoken word shows, and then they would do like dramatic plays for MLK weekend, and I would always be their MLK. So they were my first exposure to kind of spoken word in that art form, and I saw just how powerful it was it was something for us to do when we were teens. Like, let's go to the spoken word show. And for the past decade or so, they've been bringing Stockton teams to Brave New Voices, traveling students around the world. And actually, when we won our All-American City competition 2 years ago, I brought With Our Words in, because it was for our work for boys and men of color. So I brought Sammy Nunez and Fathers and Families in. But then in terms of the dramatic presentation of the work, I brought With Our Words in, and we did this beautiful 30 people wide spoken word piece on the work we're doing around My Brother's Keeper in Stockton, which was, we got standing ovation, judges were crying. It was like the talk of the whole All-American City competition. So With Our Words and Tom and Erin Brisbane are like family to me.
Yeah, I was just talking to her this morning. She's a really cool gal. And with that, I think one person who was at one of those events, Maurice Spiller, or Spill. It's just so funny. I actually have a few friends growing up that know him pretty well, so we know of each other, and it'll be good to talk to him. But there's another group along with Our Words. Before I talk about that, in your other interviews, you've mentioned famous people that have influenced some of the things you talk about, like the rose that grew from the crack in the concrete, Tupac's poem, or Malcolm X's belief that the media can make an innocent man guilty or a guilty man innocent. Are there any current influential role models that come to mind when you think about stuff that
I love J. Cole. I think I probably listen to a J. Cole song. I love Drake too, but J. Cole is more for my conscious side. Like Drake is just like I just listen to, it's kind of like the beat to control it and stuff like that. But J. Cole, Love Yours, such a great song about kind of being satisfied, being content. Or his Be Free song he did on Letterman after Michael Brown was really powerful. I love Kendrick Lamar. I think To Pimp a Butterfly is brilliant. Untitled Unmastered, also very brilliant. I think Jesse Williams and the way he speaks He uses his platform as a way to talk about current issues. It's inspiring. Other cultural figures. Harry Belafonte, just historically, through the arc of his career, how he's always risked losing money in endorsements to speak what he thinks is right, and advocate for justice. So folks like that.
Yeah, and those are two really good parallels. The rose and the crack of the concrete, more the prevalent one you use, and then to pimp a butterfly. That's, I mean, the symbolism is on point, and for that, where do you see those two images, or even just Tupac's rose and the concrete? Where do you see that for the youth growing up in Stockton? How does that relate to?
Yeah, it's funny. So every summer in the leadership program, the very first class we do is the rose that grew from concrete, and I have to teach it. No one else can teach it. I'll fly back for that class just because over the past 7 years we have kids who have tattooed it on them, kids who have made like their profile picture. It's almost like this unifying thing, like the rose, like it's our inside language. And I do it for graduation speeches and 8th grade speeches, because 8th grade promotion speeches, because I think it really speaks to the experiences of a lot of people growing up in Stockton. How it speaks to, I think, what my mom and my family taught me growing up, and that like the concrete is real, and you're not supposed to grow up like this, but despite that, you can still grow. I think that for people, it gives them hope, because oftentimes the narrative is, first of all, it's like ignore the very real inequities and very harsh material conditions of your environment. You say, oh, it doesn't exist, and you can do it because I did it. And no, it's more nuanced than that. It's like, no, let's talk about how roses aren't supposed to grow from concrete, how we're celebrating this rose that grew from concrete because no other rose did, which speaks to the difficulty of it. But that's also not impossible. And I think that nuance is what kids really gravitate to. It's like, yeah, well, I know I can do it, but I also want you to acknowledge the fact that not having a grocery store in my neighborhood is bad, or not having a father is not cool, right? And now as a policymaker, it's interesting because my frame has shifted into, okay, we'll keep growing roses from concrete, and that's cool, but how about we dismantle concrete and make sure we're planting roses in places where kids can grow? Because oftentimes I think, and I've learned that just from sharing, quote-unquote, my story, is that people love, because it's probably just an American myth, and this idea of meritocracy, this idea of exceptionalism, while it's true, it's a partial truth, and that's not necessarily a victory. One rose growing from concrete is not going to make any florist happy. You want a whole rose bush, right? I think as a society, we should expect the same of ourselves.
At the end, it talks about the one that no one cares about, kind of hinting the fact that it's a lone rose. And it's funny because know about Stockton. It's some of the most fertile ground underneath that concrete.
Right?
Got that delta going.
Delta, best soil in the nation.
In the nation. It's actually only comparable to a spot in Italy, the Po Valley. It's kind of interesting. But, we talked about the work that you do, and, you want not the credit, but at least I can feel the recognition that you want. My next question would be, what do you want people to know about Michael Tubbs versus the person versus Michael Tubbs in City Hall, or the city council member, or the mayoral candidate?
Good question.
Just to connect with the audience.
Yeah, I would say they're very similar. Only difference would be the Michael Tubbs in City Hall is probably a lot more serious. Probably a little bit more quiet. But I would say Michael Tubbs, the person, I love to be around my family and friends. I love to have fun. I love to spend hours just talking and cracking jokes and laughing, just having a good time and just celebrating life. Love to read. I love learning new things. I love traveling. I love being just unfamiliar in a place and just learning where's the coolest spot to go to. Where do you guys go on Thursdays? Like, what's the best spot to go to tonight? What do you like to eat? Who cooks it the best? And stuff like that.
And you said growing up, you had many different influences. How important is it that the community support outreach programs for our young people give them that opportunity that you were talking about?
In communities like Stockton especially, it's very important because oftentimes parents have to commute to the Bay Area. And with traffic, they're not getting home to 7 or 8. And school's out at 3. Or oftentimes, young people need stuff to do. If you don't give a young person something to do, they'll find something to do. And oftentimes it's not going to be positive, right? Like structured activities where you're able to be in a safe space, work off some energy, learn some skills, learn some life lessons are so terribly important. So for me, I've always been an advocate, and that's why I made sure the city gave money for a gym in South Stockton, because this gym had been sitting there, and they expected people to operate it with no resources. Like, no, put some money in it, and then let people run programming. Now that gym is overfilled every day with kids after school needing something to do, and now they're in a safe space where they have to do their homework. They get to learn how to play basketball, and they learn about teamwork and resiliency and courage and grit. So those things are so important, but especially for a community with a lot of people that commute, or a lot of parents who are working 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah, and then times like that, like the time difference, the time lapse of when the parents aren't home and the kids are, that is really something to think about and worry about. That's good. Music and entertainment are an essential part of something like that. Something to make the community thrive and grow. Something to get to be there. If they're jamming on guitars, they're not doing drugs type things. How important is it the city of Stockton foster the arts from the hometown acts to the headliners in the arena?
Yeah, I struggle with this question in a way, because I think the city's most effective at just setting the conditions for which that to flourish. I would hate for Michael Tubbs to dictate the local art scene in Stockton, because I'm not the most cultured person. I like Drake, J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, and gospel music, and Logic. That's why I listen. So, I think as a city, what we can do is just be supportive, and clearing out bureaucratic barriers if they exist, and also be creative about some of the things we do own, some of the assets we do have, and how do we make those amenable to folks who are artists, and also just listen to the artists. Like, what do y'all need to create? I think you see a lot of that downtown with the beautiful murals that are going up on a lot of these buildings. So stuff like that. So I think the city's best role is just not be in the way. But I think it'd be inappropriate, especially because some of my colleagues are corny. So it'd be really inappropriate for them to lead what the art scene is talking about. No,
but possibly J. Cole in the arena.
J. Cole, Drake. I'll be at those shows.
Yeah.
Carrie Underwood, not so much.
A couple more questions. As a 26-year-old, which is near the average age of Stocktonians, 30, what would you tell a gathering of your peer group is the most important thing to focus on to improve Stockton?
Man, one thing for millennials to focus on improving Stockton. It's going to have to be a tie. It's going to be a tie between education and economic development, especially because they intersect anyway. But I think millennials in Stockton have the opportunity to kind of help bring our economy to the 21st century. So we're thinking through sort of, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? What does it look like to have small business incubators? How do we bring some of that innovation spirit to Stockton? Because the only way we'll be able to provide more for residents is if we increase our tax base. So the only way to increase our tax base is to raise the level of income or the number of businesses in Stockton, and ideally both. The same thing is education, to really kind of think through, especially you're starting families, you're having kids. So how do we create pressure or partner with the school district to make sure that all our kids are receiving a world-class education? How do we make sure our kids are in schools that they deserve to be in? And not saying they aren't now, but saying that as 30-year-olds, young adults, starting families, that has to be your top priority, the education of your children. So how do you really engage and connect with the schools so that we know that your kids are getting the education they deserve?
And yeah, like the drive that comes from the rose growing from the concrete, along with the gym, places like the gym that, is able to keep kids to learn leadership skills. That's so important. So they're all so connected in their grasp to just take away from any deficit that might be there, that negative aspect of an urban city in general. In SF it definitely happens too, that bad stuff in the city is going down.
I'm
but,
sure.
What do you think their best plan of action should be, other than educating themselves? You talked about being entrepreneurial.
For young people, the best course of action would be, number one, figuring out how to open a business or to support local businesses. But I think a lot of Stockton's issues are because we don't have the resources to deal with the need. But the only way cities make money is through sales and property tax. And sales tax is based on disposable incomes. The more money people have, the more they spend, or the more they're able to spend. The more businesses we have, the more we're able to collect tax revenue. So really challenging them to think through sort of what can you open, what can you create, what can you do to help diversify our economy so that our biggest employers aren't just the government and the school district. The second actionable thing they could do is really get involved. There's so much. The only people that are serving the community should be those who serve in elected office. And we need people who are out feeding the homeless. We need people out cleaning parks. We need people out really taking ownership of their community. And then the third actionable thing they can do is really be emissaries and ambassadors for the city. Like, why do you live here? And don't talk about the negative. Talk about the good. Talk about how it's a great place to raise your kids. Talk about how you can have a 4-bedroom house for $1,400 a month, and with a backyard and a garage and a yard. And there's not crazy traffic, and you're right by the Delta. And if you need to go to the city, you're an hour away from Sacramento, an hour 30 away from San Francisco. And how there's so much diversity and culture here. Talk about stuff like that so that people see Stockton for what it is.
Get Stockton out of the precedent of the people who move out saying, being ashamed of where they're from. I mean, I don't know. That's what I always say. I'm from Stockton. It's cool. I love where I grew up. I love the people I grew up with. It's a great place. Would you say that With Our Words is like a gym for spoken word?
Oh yeah, With Our Words is a major key. They're incredible. So
you got kind of a spoken word center, a gym. Back to the music part of it. Do you envision centers for like minimal recording stuff? If it compares to Delta's facility of like stuff like that.
Yeah, I know. So Zion Academy is a music place run by Dumasoni Washington and Valerie Washington and his son Joshua Washington. And I know their dream is to open up in downtown a just music and performing arts center for kids to learn classical stuff like piano and jazz, but also hip hop and writing and stuff like that. So I know that's their dream. I've been helping them figuring out sort of how do we make that actually happen. I think that'd be a huge win for the city. And then there's also people like Ryan Leslie who are from Stockton who I think, if engaged, would love to help create some sort of art community in Stockton as well, with the focus on music.
Well, thank you so much, Michael.
Well, thank you, man.
All right.
Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, pleasure meeting you too, man. Honestly.
Got it. So, photo?
Dude, you are an amazing speaker, like off tops. I don't want to say it on the interview, but.
There we go. 1, 2, 3. Got it.
It's just, that 10,000 hours of practice. Just practice. If you talk all the time, you should be good at it eventually.
Do you mind if